Way back in the long lost year of 2010, Spartan Games released their Victorian sci fi naval combat game, Dystopian Wars. As someone who was also enamored with their space naval game Firestorm Armada, I was taken in by this new game and had a good time with it. And then Spartan Games imploded in 2017, taking Dystopian Wars with it to their grave. That is, until another company by the name of War Cradle Studios came along, bought up the IP, and brought Dystopian Wars back to the masses. And thanks to my friend Isaac, I once more got to dip my toes into the waters of the dystopian age. This new version of the game shares a fair few similarities to the original, at least in intention, but has made quite a few major changes. The stat lines of units have seen some fairly major overhauls. Gone are stats like ACAC, impact rating, and the likes. There are no longer multiple turning templates based on the sizes of ships. Damage rating has become armor, and critical ratings are gone entirely. In fact, most of the stat lines look pretty different from the old days now that I think about it. And this isn't entirely a bad thing. I think the new stat lines are pretty streamlined and easy to understand. In Dystopian Wars, you control a fleet of vehicles both above and below the waves, bringing everything from battleships to submarines to giant robots, depending on the faction you play. And unlike the old version, there are now just 3 levels: underwater, surface, and airborne. Players take it in turn to activate squadrons, moving vehicles about the table and taking actions. Each model has a number of actions they can spend to do things like attack, make repair rolls, interact with objectives, and the likes. This means that sometimes you have to make difficult decisions between trying to interact with objectives for victory points or trying to take out an enemy vessel, which can also net you victory points. One thing Dystopian Wars does really well is making you feel like you're dealing with large, ponderous ships. Units have a minimum movement speed they have to go every turn, meaning your models are always on the move and you can't just skip a unit's activation to try and force your opponent's hand. It also means you need to be constantly aware of terrain, because crashing into an island ends badly. Units also have a turning stat, which determines how many times they can make a turn during an activation. This type of little gameplay thing means you need to be constantly thinking ahead and aware of where things are on the table. At no point in our game did I ever feel like my mind wasn't engaged with what was happening, aside from trying to get my camera to cooperate. Combat in Dystopian Wars is pretty straightforward. Attacking requires the unit to spend one of their actions, and then you can fire every weapon where the target is within its firing arc. Each weapon contributes a number of dice to the attack pool, and then you roll them. The defending model rolls a number of dice equal to its defense stat, plus any relevant modifiers for things like support from token units, like escorts, obstruct the line of sight, and so forth. Dystopian Wars does use a proprietary set of dice to resolve its actions, custom 6-sided dice with a variety of symbols on them. Thankfully, the symbols really only boil down to strikes, counters, and exploding strikes. If you roll a die and the exploding strike face is rolled, you get to roll an extra die, meaning rolls can quickly spiral out of control and become far more damaging than they may seem at first glance. The original version of the game did this as well, although it did it with just regular old d6s instead of special dice. Once all the dice have been rolled, it's time to tally things up. Each counter cancels out a strike result, heavy counters cancel too. After that, you look at the remaining strikes on the board and you compare that total, with heavy strikes and exploding strikes both counting as 2 strikes, against the target's armor. For every number of strikes that meet or beat the armor value, you deal 1 damage to the target's hull. So, for example, if you end up with 13 strikes against a target with armor 4, you'll end up doing 3 damage to it, and the leftover strike is discarded. While it can seem like the attack and defenses are kinda loaded in favor of the attacker, as the attacking models will usually be rolling considerably more dice, models with high armor can take a lot of hits without sustaining a lot of damage in the long run. But a single bad defense roll can do even the most expensive units in pretty quickly, as I learned when my battleship failed spectacularly and took a shit ton of damage in a single attack. There's also a second set of critical effect dice that you roll to try and inflict critical effects on ships. This is usually via weapon special abilities or when a ship is crippled, i.e. at 0 hull points, but hasn't taken enough damage to explode. These didn't really come up a lot in our game, but I can see how if you build around certain weapons, you could be rolling these pretty frequently. Dystopian Wars also uses what it calls the Valor and Victory deck. Each player has a deck of these cards, and they're used for a variety of things. Most importantly, they're used to determine initiative, with both players playing one of their cards face down and then flipping to see who played the card with the higher value. They're also used to make crew checks when ships have sustained a level disorder through heavy damage or special rules, or when trying to ram enemy ships by flipping the top card of your deck and comparing it to the crew value of the unit. If the card value is less than or equal to the crew value, you succeed. They also have a Valor effect and a Victory effect. These effects can be used when certain triggers are met, allowing you to either impact the game via Valor effects like gaining extra dice on attacks or making a unit's minimum movement 0 inches for a turn, or letting you play them to claim extra victory points during the game. The models are also quite nice, with most things being plastic outside some of the bigger flagship units that are still resin. And the cost isn't too bad either. Starter fleets, which come with a good selection of ships as well as the dice, templates, a Victory and Valor deck, and so forth, clocking at under $70, and expanding to a decent sized fleet is pretty easy with another $40 to $50. I'll go into more detail on the models once I have mine in hand, though. As we always say, though, no game is perfect. I don't feel like the proprietary dice and cards are completely necessary. They aren't the most egregious offenders in the industry. Yes, I'm looking directly at you, Fantasy Flight and Atomic Mass games. But I wonder if the game would still work fine without them. They aren't bad, and they're well made, but does the game need them? At the very least, I kind of wish the cards were optional. Again, they aren't bad, but maybe pick one thing. The game is also pretty heavy on special rules, and some of them get pretty wordy, which can slow things down a bit and have you constantly needing to double check what weapons have what rules and how those rules all work. It can also be a little weird to do an attack with two different weapons, as they might have different rules that you need to keep track of, such as critical effects checks and the likes. It's not awful, but it does sometimes feel a tad clunky. My other major issue isn't even with the game design itself, but rather in documentation. Please, Warcradle, if you're listening, put an extra page in each Orbat that goes over the rules for the generators fleets can take. I shouldn't have to flip between two documents when trying to figure out building a fleet, because I need to constantly remind myself which generators my faction can use and then hunting down what they do. Or, at the very least, put the generators in their own little section of the rules glossary so I don't have to hunt through the entire systems section to find them. A little streamlining is all I ask. All that being said, I think Dystopian Wars is back in style. It's clear the people at Warcradle care about it and are invested in making the best game they can. As someone who remembers the original with fond nostalgia, this newest iteration captures that same spirit and is honestly a much smoother experience overall. If you're looking for a naval combat game and want some sci-fi twists, Dystopian Wars is a great option. Plus the rules, Orbats, assembly and ID guides, and even the Victory and Valor deck are all available as free downloads from Warcradle's website, which I'll link in the description. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Once again, big shout out to Isaac for giving me my demo, and I hope to see you all upon the high seas soon with guns a-blazing.